Hi, I'm Ellie, and I'm going to be talking about my personal journey towards realizing that I'm neurodivergent. Blah blah. This is harder than it looks. Hi, I'm Ellie, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about my personal journey towards realizing that I'm neurodivergent and how, retrospectively, I can see how it affected me growing up. I think and I hope that my story will resonate with a lot of people who have maybe come to this understanding of themselves as an adult. I'd love to hear about your own journeys too, so please leave a comment down below if you'd like to share anything with the group. So up until recently, I always considered myself to be neurotypical, although looking back, I really don't know why I would think that. It wasn't until my son was diagnosed with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, that I began to question how normal I really was. I'm in quite a few Facebook groups where you can get parenting advice, and I joined one specifically because it was aimed at parenting autistic kids. And one of the rules is that when you post, you have to specify your neurotype. So you could say ND for neurodivergent, or AA for actually autistic, NT for neurotypical, for example. So I posted a question and said I was NT, and people started commenting, "Are you really though?" And so naturally, I felt the need to begin to defend myself. So I was like, well, I do have major sensory aversions and I get easily overwhelmed, but that's because I have migraines. I'm not autistic. And then, of course, the keyboard warriors came back at me with, or are your migraines a result of your sensory aversions and overwhelm? Then it kind of got me thinking some more. Well, yeah, I have sensory aversions. I get easily overwhelmed. I feel completely misunderstood. I hate small talk. I get obsessed with certain subjects. I get a bit flappy when I'm excited. I often mimic people's accents. Eye contact makes me feel uncomfortable. I blurt out random things when I'm anxious. But that doesn't make me oh my goodness, I'm autistic. Oh my goodness. And I talked to my mum about it, and she was like, "Oh my goodness, I'm autistic too." And so we've kind of both been on this like crazy research thing where we've been watching every video, reading every book and article, and learning everything we can about autism, specifically how it manifests in females, as it's often very different to boys. A lot of girls and women go through their whole lives even feeling like there's something a bit wrong with them, but not really knowing why, because they don't fit the stereotype of what an autistic person should look like, which is pretty much like the idea of a sort of young white male doing certain things. And so, a lot of people aren't young white males, so they don't fit that stereotype. Even some of the young white males don't fit that stereotype, but that's a subject for another day. So yeah, I did loads of research, I read books, I took loads of tests that are available online, and they all said that I was very likely to be autistic. Then later, through conversations with a friend, my mum, and more research, I've come to realize that I likely also have ADHD. Obviously, none of that constitutes a formal diagnosis, but one thing I've learned is that in the neurodiverse community, diagnoses are generally considered a luxury rather than a necessity. They can take years to get, they often cost a lot of money, particularly if you live somewhere like the US, and it's very emotionally taxing as a process. So generally, self-diagnosis is considered equally valid, but that's not to say that I won't get a diagnosis. I may well look into it later in life, but for now I'm happy with just being aware myself and coming to terms with that and how it affects my life going forward. So now I'm going to take you on a little journey through my early childhood and explain some of my experiences that I now recognize as being due to having just a different kind of brain. So my first memory of being singled out as weird was in my first year of primary school, reception, or elementary school if you're in America. It was a Christian school, and there was a vicar out the front talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is religion, Christianity. And I think he asked a question like, how many books are there in the Bible? And at the tender age of 4, I stuck my hand up and said, 66. And he was very impressed, of course, and I was feeling very happy with myself, so I did a sort of happy little wiggle in my seat and flicked my fingers like this. And my best friend at the time, who was sitting next to me, sort of looked at me sideways and said, why did you just do that? That was so weird. And so I kind of made a mental note, okay, that's weird, don't do that. I also remember a similar incident when I was in my second year at that school, when the teacher expressed concern to my mum that she thought I might be having seizures in the classroom. She would often see me stamping my feet on the floor and patting my head and doing the finger thing when I was working on a project. And like I said, she was worried that it was a seizure or something similar. And my mum explained that when I did this, it was because I was happy and I was thinking about something that filled me with joy. And so from then on, whenever she saw me do it, my teacher would come over to me and ask what I was thinking about. And I remember on one particular occasion, I told her that I was listening to my mummy sing to me. And of course, my mummy wasn't there. But I've always really loved music, and my head is pretty much like a radio station. It's either constantly playing songs that I like or that I've heard or even that I'm making up. Or it's like my thoughts chatting away like some kind of chat show. I'm really good at remembering song lyrics, and I used to play this game on long car journeys where I would have like this little CD player Walkman thing, if you remember those. Shows how old I am. And I used to get my parents to try and guess whether I was listening to a song and singing along with it, or whether I was just singing it from memory. And most of the time they could not tell at all. So yeah, that was fun. But as I progressed beyond the first couple of years at primary school, I started to have real problems with friendships, and it was obvious that a lot of people just didn't like me. I didn't really understand why. I was a favourite target for bullying. People thought I was weird, so I used to play by myself a lot at break time, or sometimes I'd wander around with the teacher and talk to them. All the other kids would be running around playing tag, or as we called it in the area I grew up, it. And I just thought that was the most pointless, mindless game. Like, why would you just run around? I didn't get it. Anyway, so I would instead just retreat into my imaginary world. Occasionally, I found someone to play imaginary games with, and that was fun. And I even made a few close friends. But my friendships usually ended badly because I would inevitably say completely the wrong thing at some point, and then that person wouldn't want to be friends with me anymore. I always assumed that I was different because I was a Christian, and this is what my parents assumed as well. However, when I think about it, I didn't really manage to connect with any kids from church either, and I was always amazed by how popular they seemed. Like, they would talk about their friends at school and that kind of thing, and I'm like, how do you have friends? What is this weird magic? But I did have a lot more success making friends with boys than I did girls. There was a lot less guesswork when it came to understanding them. They were more direct. They were less complicated and also less sensitive. If I happened to say the wrong thing, they just were more likely to brush it off or say something silly back to me. So that was better. And also, it didn't help. There were only 8 girls in my class. So once I managed to alienate them all one by one, there weren't really any options left for me other than boys. As time went by, as I kind of had hinted at before, I made a sort of mental list of things that were or weren't socially acceptable for me to say and do in different situations. And that helped me a little bit with friendships as I went into secondary school, which is like middle school. And I did manage to find a group of friends, girls that I clicked with and hang out with. Although I think the more popular ranks of preteen society would have deemed us as losers. But I wasn't really at that school long enough to make much of an impact because my family moved to France when I was 13. And that was a whole other kettle of fish. Once I'd managed to overcome the language barrier, which took me about 6 months, I found it a lot easier to establish strong friendships in France, but not because the French are any more accepting or open-minded, but just because people expect there to be social differences between people of different nationalities. So what my English friends would have seen as a weird Ellie thing, the French saw as an English thing. That's just what English people do. And apparently this is a really common phenomenon and why a lot of neurodiverse people prefer to live abroad. Often you can also find a culture that just more naturally gels with your own preferences and sensitivities. So, for example, I'm currently reading a book by an autistic woman who chooses to spend a lot of her time in Japan, where people tend to be more reserved and less touchy-feely. By the way, if that is also your tendency, I would not recommend living in France, the land where you have to kiss everyone you know twice or even 3 times on the cheeks when you greet them and when you say goodbye. I mean, that was a hellish experience for me personally, and I frequently pretended to have a cold to get out of that particular French ritual. Every country has its own particularities, and one thing I appreciate about the French is that they tend to have a more direct communication style, which is, I suppose, why a lot of other countries have the stereotype of French people being rude. I found I was much freer to say what I thought in France, and often my directness was celebrated by other kids and teachers alike. I remember shortly after moving there, I noticed that the French seemed to enjoy hurling insults at each other, and that was considered normal, friendly banter. And I picked up on this, of course, and I actually tried it out on one of my English friends who I'd stayed in contact with after moving. I called her the English equivalent of a friendly French insult, and to my great surprise, she was insulted and we never spoke again. I wonder why. In France, I also discovered that I could overcome my hatred of big social situations with the help of alcohol and magically turn into a social butterfly of sorts. Thankfully, I didn't do this so often that it became a long-term problem for me, but I know that lots of neurodivergent people do end up with addiction problems due to them desperately trying to mask their social differences. Then I went to a 6th form college, which is like high school, which was focused on art, and that involved attending a boarding school. So just to say, I know that in the UK and a lot of other countries, boarding is considered an elitist thing and is only accessible to the super rich. But in France, it's actually really common because everything is just so spread out that if you want to study anything other than your basic maths, literature, sciences, you most likely have to travel a significant distance, and that would involve boarding there. So boarding was a really difficult experience for me because I didn't have anywhere I could relax and just be myself without fear of judgment. I was either at school with loads of other people, on a bus with loads of other people, or in a dorm with loads of other people. So I had to completely suppress all of my quirks to try and fit in. And there wasn't anyone that I really felt like I could be myself with. So that's when I started getting into songwriting. And at least with a guitar in hand, I could say what I really felt. And it seemed to make people like me and appreciate me more because they just saw somebody talented saying kind of weird, artistic sounding things. The other thing that I did though was to retreat into a dream world. Whenever I couldn't cope with the world around me, I would just zone out and imagine myself somewhere else, having the social interactions I wish I could have, and being the person I wished I could be. I did still experience some bullying in France, but interestingly, it was more by the teachers than the other kids. To be fair though, a lot of kids in France are bullied or were bullied by their teachers. It's a bit of a problem and I hope it's resolving. But obviously this was some years ago, so I don't really know. If you know, however, I would be very interested in hearing, so let me know. Do teachers still bully people in France as much as they used to? So that's my childhood in a nutshell. I may go into more detail about specific events as and when they become relevant as I go on to make more videos. And I definitely plan to talk about my experience of early adulthood in another video. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, give me a thumbs up and please subscribe to my channel. Click the little bell to be notified when I make new videos and all that jazz. Thank you and goodbye.